Quick name check, it's Practicology. But there you go. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. How you doing, guys? A few early flights this morning, the red eye. Does everybody speak English? But you all speak Scottish? The gentleman from California there, I was trying to think of parallels between Scotland and California, and I couldn't think of any. Certainly not the weather. Thinking of similarities between Ireland and Scotland, I think there's quite a few more. For those of you that saw the drummers earlier, it's nice to know we're not the only ones that wear kilts or skirts. For those of you who come from other parts of the world, we also like to drink. As those of you that are going to the party tonight will find out, I can do a bit of that. The weather is very similar. The one probably big difference is we're pretty crap at sport, and the Irish are actually quite good at that. Anyway, without further ado, onto my presentation. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you very much to Google for inviting me. I think you know you've arrived as a speaker when you get asked by Google to come and do a keynote presentation, so I'm very honoured to be here. I'm going to share my top tips for launching a business, an e-business, or an e-commerce channel for your business when you're going abroad. Very practical. I hope that you can take a bunch of these ideas back to your business to help you plan internationalization and to help you execute it more effectively than you have. So what gives me the right to stand in front of you good folks, apart from the fact I'm Scottish? So I'm the CEO of Practicology. I'm not the chairman yet. I'm actually the founder and chief executive of Practicology. We're a leading e-commerce and multi-channel consulting business. I'll talk about us in a minute. I'm a non-executive director on the board of Conviviality Retail. Most of you will never have heard of them. They actually are a PLC, and the brands are Bargain, Booze, and The Wine Rack. Every Scotsman should have a non-executive role on a business that sells alcohol. I'm also on the advisory board of Wiggle, and we have the lovely Shona Primrose coming up later on in the panel. So if anybody is into cycling, running, triathlon, or swimming, you ought to be buying your gear on Wiggle, and if you haven't done so, you should do now because it's a cracking experience. And I also provide advice to breast cancer care. So that's a little bit about me. A few more points. As was mentioned earlier, I've worked in multi-channel retailing pretty much all of my career. I have had responsibility for stores, but I focused mainly on the web, direct mail, kiosks in stores and other distance selling channels. I now run Practicology. We also have an office in Sydney, which is rather handy at certain times of the year. This year I was included in the interactive Hot 100. Clearly it's got nothing to do with my looks. I accept that. I was named for the 4th year running on Retail Week's e-tail power list of the top 50 most influential people in e-commerce. I'm building up to something now. And I chair the Retail Week e-commerce summit and some other events as well. I also judged the PayPal e-tail awards and have done so for the past 4 years. So that's amazing, isn't it? It makes me sound like I'm absolutely fantastic. Now, clearly, if I had all the answers, I'd be sitting there. So I don't have all the answers. I've got some of them, and I'll share the ones that I do have today. For those of you that don't know a shameless plug, that's what a shameless plug looks like. It'd be crazy of me to come. There is no such thing as a free seminar or a free lunch. So I just want to tell you very briefly a little bit about Practicology. I'm not going to go through all of these, but essentially we do everything from sort of strategy right the way through execution. Fundamentally, we do it for some cracking brands. We've recently added Waitrose to that list as well. But most importantly, and this is the thing that makes us different from other consulting businesses, we actually don't see ourselves as consultants. We see ourselves as an extension to the retailer's team. We are all practicologists. We've all been at the coalface. We continue to do it every day of the week because we actually run the online store for some of our clients, and that keeps us honest. So that's what my business is all about. I'm going to talk about some of the key issues I've grappled with around internationalization, and I know that some of these will resonate for you. But first of all, let's talk about the opportunity. The international audience for online is developing. I think we all know that. Otherwise, there wouldn't be nearly 400 of you here. However, at the same time, just talking about it from a UK perspective, lots of UK customers are buying overseas. So I'll talk about this later on, but I think internationalization, it does work both ways. It's an opportunity. It's also a threat. So, I think in terms of thinking through your business models, not only how you're pursuing it as an opportunity to expand your reach, but what are you going to do about it when the Chinese come calling, as they are starting to do, when they want to take some of your customers away. PayPal, who we're going to hear from, they've said that 16% of online shopping in the UK, the US, Australia, Germany, Brazil, and China is cross-border and worth about 105 billion last year. But by 2018, it will be more like 130 million cross-border shoppers spending over 300 billion. So it's a fantastic opportunity to tap into that demand. And in the UK, savvy UK retailers are developing localized sites in order to maximize the opportunity in different markets. just to talk about some of the key drivers. Obviously, some brands out there have different channels to market. So if you're a brand like Ted Baker, for example, where I used to be head of e-commerce a number of years ago, you have a wholesale business, you have a direct-to-consumer business. In the wholesale business, you might have opportunities to tap into local market, offline retailers that are selling your brands in other markets, local market pure plays, international pure plays, international stores who already ship worldwide. You might have franchise partners in different markets, retail opportunities, you've got stores, you've got online, you've got showrooms. I'm seeing increasing numbers of pop-ups. Net-a-Porter, I think, have a pop-up in New York. ASOS are starting to pop up stores all over the place. I wonder how long it is before Amazon open stores, never mind pop-ups. You can drop ship through partners such as Amazon, eBay, or local versions of. Martijn talked about that already. You know, marketplaces are an interesting route to market, a relatively cost-effective way of dipping your toes and finding out what the demand is in a new territory. UK in-store opportunities to drive loyalty to localized sites. Multilingual store staff, buy in store for delivery to home, multi-currency payment gateways on tills, capturing emails. Burberry now have Mandarin-speaking sales assistants in London so that they can capture the needs and the demands of the international tourist customers that are coming in their increasing droves to the UK to spend their increasing levels of disposable income. Many years ago when I was at Harrods, going back to about 2004, I actually developed a welcome back passport. Might seem like a pretty simple thing, but when you've got a retail business whose customers, well, who's a big chunk of whose customers are tourists, isn't it a great thing to just give them a little passport that they can take back with them when they go back to the States, when they go back to Japan or wherever they're going, with a little promotion code to get them to re-engage with the brand, to place an order online, to continue that relationship. So there's lots of little small things that you can do to tap into customers that might be coming to your store business in your existing market. Now, I don't want to be controversial, but most of you will know that the British do have a habit of colonizing. So these are various countries in the world that we've colonized in the past. I apologize to my hosts for this, but I'm going somewhere with this. And I think we are doing it now online. And in my humble opinion, I think a lot of UK retailers are probably leading the way. However, and there's always a however, we don't always get it right. And I've got quite an amusing little video to show you. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but it talks about one of our larger retailers and how they got internationalization badly wrong on one occasion. Could you play the video?
2011 saw major changes in the way we shopped. All electronic equipment was given away free with newspapers, while everything else was bought at Tesco's.
Now, I was mentioning Tesco earlier on because Tesco are always in the news these days.
By 2012, Tesco's had a superstore in every square mile in Britain.
Tesco were brokering world heavyweight bouts, representing entertainment stars. They were making most of the films that were being made. Tesco's slogan changed from every little helps to we control every aspect of your lives.
Soon Tesco's got planning permission to build anywhere in the country, even on the side of a cliff. By then, Britain was fully saturated with Tesco's, and the supermarket chain concluded it would have to look elsewhere for domination.
And then there was the war with Denmark. It started, of course, because Tesco needed room to expand. For a long time they'd yearned to create a superstate which was, well, the first retail country.
At noon on January the 21st, 2013, Tesco's invaded Denmark with 200 superstores and 1,500 Tesco Expresses.
The Tesco thing was a shock.
Excuse the language.
Because I quite like the Danes. A couple of my occasional fucks are Danes.
The Danes are a proud people. They're of Viking stock. What they want is to rape and pillage, to set fire to longships. They don't want to be walking around a supermarket and seeing Nuts magazine at the checkout next to some chewing gum and a hairnet. That's not what the Vikings want.
The war between Tesco's and Denmark lasted just 5 hours. This is all that remains of Copenhagen.
Okay, so apologies to anybody from Tesco in the crowd. I'm not sure if we have any. Good friend of mine is the multi-channel director there, so I really ought to stop showing that video. Anyway, clearly that is a step too far when it comes to localization. I think there's lots of steps that you can implement in the short term. I hope you enjoyed that. So what's happening now in terms of strategy and approach? This was mentioned at the start. There's kind of 6 strategies that I see. One is do nothing. There's a surprising number of UK retailers still don't allow customers from international markets to buy from them online. I'm never 100% sure why that is. If it's electrical products or certain other products that maybe don't ship that well, I can understand. But lots of retailers, I think, could be doing it that aren't doing it that well. Then there's standardization, and that's my term for, well, we've switched on the buy button, but if you want to buy from us, you have to talk to us in our language. It's GB, it's Great Britain, it's English. You pay in pounds, GBP. If you want customer service, you have to call someone in London or possibly in India. You have to talk to them, you have to talk to us in English, and so on and so forth. There's no level of localization at all. There's no local currency or anything else. Then there's adaptation, and that's where the brand has maybe gone to the effort to localize something, whether that's language, whether that's payment type, currency, or so on. And then there's what I call full localization, or the full Monty, which we'll talk about later, which is where the brand has fully localized the customer proposition online. Some retailers are now going multi-channel, primarily leading with online, testing the water, and then deciding to open stores. So we're doing some work with a couple of big American retailers at the moment who want to come into the UK, who want to come into Europe, and we're building a business case for them to work out what's the right way to do that. It's probably going to be web first, and then eventually, if they can prove the demand, they'll open some stores, because although they're very well known in the States, their brands aren't particularly well known in the UK. Others are leading with stores and then localizing online. So River Island, a multi-channel fashion retailer turning over £1 billion, they launched in Australia after having a localized website. So they went local web, and then they had a site, then they went with stores, and now they're going online. My apologies, the wrong way around. There is a path to localization, and there is a path to localization, which I'm going to walk through now. So most brands tend to start with the URL strategy and think about, do I have a top-level .com domain, or do I go for a local country-level domain? Then sometimes they start to think about the delivery options, fulfillment options. They might make some changes to checkout forms in order to accommodate some local market requirements. Then they move into currency. Then they start thinking about translating the sites. Then they start thinking about payment types, some of which we've touched on already and we'll talk about again in a bit, such as ELV in Germany. Then they think about customer service. Invariably, that comes much further down the line. Let's create some demand and then worry about, serving the customer afterwards. I would put that a little bit earlier in the journey. Returns processing, how are we going to manage that? Whoops, well, all of a sudden we've got all this demand. What are we going to do with 30% of the products that are being returned? How long are we going to allow for the stock to sit there and devalue before doing something about it? And how are we going to manage that process for customers? And then, of course, localized marketing and creative. In my experience, marketing does have a limitation in terms of its return prior to putting some of the other building blocks in place, but I'm certainly not advocating that you don't test it. And of course, AdWords is a great way of testing demand on local market. These guys here, Google, can give you some great insight into, in different categories, what customers are actually searching for, and give you an idea of where the demand might be that maybe isn't being satisfied within your product categories right now. Selfridges is a business that I know and respect. In fact, it's probably Selfridges in Oxford Street, for anyone that's been there, is probably my favourite retail destination, even though they're not a client. I see here that I can select Germany. They're now delivering to me. It says down here that ordering's simple. It doesn't really look that simple. It tells me, well, it talks about most of our products are available for international delivery, but we've added an icon so you can be sure. What does that mean? That means that they're not all available for international delivery. When exactly do I find that out? So anyway, it doesn't look that simple. This is us again, the Brits, with the Union Jack. So you probably have seen us on our holidays in Ibiza and Mallorca. I hope that is not my 17-year-old daughter when she goes away with her friends this summer to Mallorca. I sadly think it might be, but who knows? Anyway, we are a little bit arrogant, and we do have a tendency to think that everyone around the world speaks English, or at the very least everybody around the world should speak English. But that's simply not the case. So if I were a German and I landed on Selfridges' site and I had a look at that very overly priced D-squared shirt at £335, I may well say to myself, wie viel kostet das? How much does that cost? Because I don't speak English. At best, I might speak Manglish. For those of you that are German in the audience will know what Manglish is. And you're going to see a video on that in a minute. So there are lots of Germans don't speak English or particularly don't want to speak English. I'm going to show you a short video. A lot of you will probably have seen this, but I think it's still one of the funniest videos around. And it's a great example of why local language, in my opinion, is massively important in particularly very strong nationalistic countries like Germany.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
There you go. One of the best adverts ever for Berlitz. So, still makes me laugh. I've probably watched it 100 times now, and I think it's fantastic. And I do have a client in Germany, and they told me this term, I think it's Manglish, which is an expression for Germans that speak English with that type of accent, with a very strong German accent. But, you know, the reality is, funny as that is, it really matters to conversion. So if you walk along this little arrow here, we've got, at the left-hand side, a non-translated site. We then go to the main navigation and the site structure, excuse the spelling mistake, including the checkout being translated, to help in customer service, product pages, marketing banners, the newsletter, and all the product pages translated. And not surprising, the further down you come, the higher your conversion is. So, you know, I think you can get away with local language sites like English in Scandinavia. I think you can get away with it in Holland. I think you can definitely get away with it in Australia, although they speak a very unique form of English. But in France and Germany and other mainland European markets, I think if you don't make the effort to translate the site and give them an experience that's relevant to them, why would you expect them to buy from you, is my question. Alfred Dunhill, some of you know them, high-end luxury brand. This is what I call adaptation. I got excited, homepage of the site, selected Germany. I see that I can localize some aspects, but when I click on that, I see the only thing they've done, they changed the URL, but it's still in English, because I can see that English/German URL. Adaptation is pretty half-hearted, and it's only when I go down a level that I see the only thing they've changed is the currency. So that's some help, gives me some idea of, you know, what the pricing is. But again, if I don't speak English, I'm going to be pretty lost at that stage. Then there's the full Monty. Everyone know the full Monty? Yeah? Bit hot up here, by the way. I'm glad that went down well. Clark's. Clark's have implemented what I call the full Monty of localization. So they've localized everything. They localize language, they localize content, they localize product, they localize customer service, they localize the hours of customer service, they localize currency, they localize payment types. So they've localized everything. So they've said to the German customer, to the Dutch customer, to the Spanish customer, and so on and so forth, if you want to buy from us, we are serious about selling to you because we have made the effort to give you a proposition that's completely relevant to you and your needs and your culture and your background and your language and everything else. And I'm going to talk about Clark's later because I think they're a really good case study. Some key drivers. What does good look like? How do you measure all that and how do you work out what the opportunity is? Well, obviously, if you've got a store presence, that's a good start. You can think, well, actually, there's a good chance of me driving traffic to a website if I've already got some stores. If you've got any existing partnerships in the local market, that's a pretty good help as well. Marketing activities, including PR. I'll talk about that in more detail. Martijn talked about that. I think PR is massively important when you go into a market and nobody knows you from Adam, if you know that expression. Brand awareness, again, similarly. Internet penetration, size of population of the market, trading history, if you have any in that market. Conversion, user experiences, they're all different, and I'm going to give you some examples that Clark's have shared with me about the very obvious differences between certain customers in different markets. Localization, including translation, payment methods, delivery costs and delivery propositions. Most UK retailers at the minute, the service proposition around delivery, wherever you are in the world, you know, Europe, it's like 5 days. Australia, it's 10 to 20 days. I mean, honestly, why would you bother? you can get it in your own market pretty much, or from another country next door overnight or the next day. Product offering, and I'm going to talk about product as well. Competition from wholesalers, partners, and other local competitors. So again, if you're a brand, it might be a complicated business model going into other markets where you might already have distributors, both in terms of retailers, possibly franchisees, licensees, and so on and so forth. Average order values. How many items are you going to generate per order? It will be different in different markets. Does the customer in that market have disposable income? That's kind of important. What's your pricing strategy going to be? Is it going to be the same in all markets? That gets really complicated sometimes, especially again if you're a brand already selling in other territories, but you've got a different price in your home market, possibly in the UK, Ireland, or whatever. Payment types, and we'll talk about that in more detail later. The cost of shipping and promotional thresholds. Sorry, just to reiterate that I think we're going to make these slides available, so you'll get all of this content later. Returns, reliability of shipping partners. You know, if you want to have a look at one brand that I think does the best job of de-risking buying online just about anywhere, it's Zappos. Unfortunately, you can't buy from Zappos if you live here or you live anywhere else in Europe, I think, unless they've changed their policy. However, they do a brilliant job of de-risking it for customers. If you look at their masthead, you walk along the masthead, it tells you they're powered by service. It tells you that it's free returns, 365 days a year, and free delivery. So they're de-risking the proposition for you buying online, and particularly buying a product which, let's be honest, you know, one brand's size to another brand's size of footwear generally is quite different. So it's a difficult product to buy online, and they make it really easy. Customer habits. And we'll talk about the impact of that. You know, Germany, massive returns. I'm sure those of you selling in that market already know that. So we'll talk about that and why that is. Sizing guides and clarity of product information. You know, one country's size guide means something very different somewhere else. You know, UK sizes are not the same as US sizes, and so on and so forth. We talked about payment types, invoicing. Invoicing drives higher returns. So customers who pay by invoice generally have a higher return rate. Abandoned baskets, the things that cause people to abandon at that crucial stage. So they've gone to the trouble of, you know, walking around your website, picking up things that they think they want to buy, whether that's a physical product, whether that's, you know, a piece of apparel, accessories, electrical goods, whatever it is, and then for whatever reason they abandon. Why do they do that? Some of it's around the delivery charges. Sometimes they're too late in the checkout flow. They're not in the shopping bag, which is where they should be, but they're actually in the checkout, which is too late. Sometimes it's a lack of payment types. Sometimes it's about fraud screening that kicks people out. Sometimes it's about security and privacy concerns. If you go selling online in somebody else's market and you have a store business, make sure you tell them. Make sure you tell them you've been in business since 1943 or 1922 or 1860 and you've got 34 stores or 120 stores, because that provides credibility. You go into a new market, most consumers won't know you from the next person or the next business. Checkout options, guest checkout versus forced registration. I think most of you should know that, otherwise we're all sitting in the wrong room. Checkout information, you know, the process of that and the ease of use. These are all key drivers and key facilitators to taking people through that conversion funnel and getting them from the shopping bag right the way through the checkout. I'm going to talk about some other case studies now. So I think, does anybody here not know ASOS? I'm sure nobody's going to stick their hands up. Right, we've all heard of ASOS, fantastic business, rapidly approaching £1 billion or nearly $2 billion worth of turnover. They are a global fashion retailer. They have the ambition to become the #1 fashion destination globally for 20-somethings. Clearly, I'm not in that audience, but I do still buy occasionally from ASOS. That's more of a mindset in a midlife crisis than anything else. English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Russian. Payment in 15 currencies, language in all those different languages. They ship to 190 countries. 64% of their total sales are international. Now, that's not bad going for a business that set up in 2000 and up until a few years ago didn't do a lot around international. What they did is they offered free delivery worldwide. They just said, we're taking a strategic decision and that we believe as a business we'll capture enough new demand, and we know what the lifetime value of that new demand is going to be, that we can afford to offer free delivery. So that was a pretty brave thing to do, and that helped them capture a lot of market share in new territories. International is growing at 47%, and that's now very much driven by dedicated sites, dedicated teams, and dedicated fulfillment. They're updating their platform to allow different language character sets, so they can now talk to 90% of potential customers in their own language, and they have a dedicated site now in China doing rather well as well. Believe it or not, they ship 3 jumbo jets worth of products a week to Australia. That's £1.25 to £1.5 million. I'm not quite sure, because the rate of exchange keeps changing fairly dramatically at the minute, what that is in euros, but you can do the maths. That's a lot of products. So Australia certainly was their biggest market outside the UK. I think it's pretty much neck and neck with the States now, but they are the biggest fashion, online, e-tailer, retailer, whatever you want to call them, in Australia, and yet their home base is 10,000, 15,000 miles away. So how do you feel about that if you're an Australian retailer? Well, we're now doing something to help them, but that's another story. Bowden. Are they still a British brand? For those of you who know the Bowden, in 2012, over half of their sales were international. They now trade in 60 countries. 90% of their sales are online. They started largely as a catalogue business, direct selling, distance selling rather. In 2012, European revenues, excluding the UK, were up 29%, and the US was up 10%. So they're driving a lot of growth internationally. Also last year, they hired a heavy-hitting global brand director. Never met her. Penny Harriman. Comes highly rated from a digital marketing agency to support further international expansion plans. So as we're seeing brands internationalize, they're bringing people in the right skill sets into the organizational structure and the organizational design to really drive that. And again, we'll talk about that in a second when we talk about Clarks. So Clarks obviously do have an advantage because they already have lots of wholesalers and also, franchisees and some of their own stores throughout Europe and other parts of the world. In terms of payment solutions, the feedback that they've given me is nothing new here. It's got to be local. We mentioned earlier about Ideal being a key payment card or payment type in the Netherlands. The Germans don't like credit cards. They have the lowest level of credit card penetration in Europe. Most people don't realise that. I'm not sure whether that stretches back to the post-war years, but whatever it is, Germans do not like paying on credit. They prefer ELV, bank transfer, direct debit, other ways of paying cash. Let me pay you for this now. Clarks are also working to take a payment method called support and payment by invoice, and PayPal works particularly well for them across pretty much all European markets. And eventually this will click on to the next slide. Thank you very much. I'm not really sure why these don't come out as bullet points because I did bulletize them, but anyway, bear with me. They've told me that cliches are true, that Germans are fastidious. So for those of you, that's quite a difficult word for a Scotsman, so I'm not 100% sure what fastidious means. I think it kind of means process-driven and very focused. And we know that the Germans are like that. So when they shop by product type, they shop by shoes, they shop by boots, they're very specific. Shoe technology is hugely important to them. So they're buying into the tech behind the product. They plan their purchases. The market is very quickly into the new season. In terms of the experience and usability on the site, they like to use internal search. The internal search function on the site that usually sits in the top right-hand corner, and they use left-hand navigation. Lots of calls to the contact center about shoes purchased many, many years ago. So Germans, they're very detail-orientated, and if you're going to serve them, you're going to have to give them the right level of service and understand what their demands are going to be. The French, on the other hand, sorry, I'm still in the Germans. I apologise. The Germans, I'll start again. The Germans, very high return rates. I think part of that is born out of their catalogue heritage. So Germans are used to buying from the big books, Otto, and all those other big direct mail companies, and they're used to returning lots of products, just as we do in the UK with the next catalogue and so on. But they do represent Clarks' highest conversion rate and highest average order value through all of their sites, including their site in the UK. Sadly, they won't tell me what those specific numbers are, disappointingly. Paid search is important for them, but it's extremely competitive. Search engine optimization or natural search is also very competitive, especially on generic terms, as you can imagine. And affiliate commission rates are very high. It's taken them a while to build, but now much more positive. The French. Clichés are true. The French are much more emotional. Less internal search and navigation, much more use of links and contents and graphics. So bring the site to life for the French images, colours, lifestyle shots. The French tend to shop by end use, i.e. workwear. Fashion and inspirational features work particularly well and get high level of engagement in terms of content. And they purchase when they need to purchase, so much later start into the season. So probably harder to plan exactly what your run rate is going to look like when you're selling in France. You need to expect that it's maybe not going to take off quite as quickly straight away as it would do in Germany. Conversion rates are lower, as are average order values, but the returns are also much lower. In fact, I'm sure they did share that with me, and I think it's about half of what it is in Germany. They get very good results from affiliate programs in France, and a lot more online retailers generally hold more promotional events, especially private sales. So the French customer is very open to that type of engagement and to offers and whatnot. Good SEO results for generic terms, so they're doing pretty well in France. Another UK fashion business, Jack Wills. So they're starting to look at their organisational design. I'm sure you're all thinking about this in your core business. Organisational design is the kind of buzzword of the year this year. We're working with some pretty big retailers to help them think about, do you have a separate e-commerce team, or do you start to think about integrating all of your channels? So retailers are having to do this internationally as well. Think about, how am I going to manage international? What sort of resources do I need? And Jack Wills have been quite impressive. They brought in a fairly senior director from Reiss to be their international director. They brought in someone from Gap to be their chief marketing officer. And they replaced their global head of e-commerce with a global digital director, and Jan Mehmet, who I know very well, who's ex-FitFlop and Urban Outfitters. So really beefing up their team, and a large part of that was to really start to drive their international sales. So not just focusing on the domestic market. Emerging market challengers, South Korea might not be your primary objective. Some of you might be looking at that as a market. Their largest retail group, Lotte Shopping, gives an indication of the competition that Western retailers are going to face when they try to get into the Far East. So the Far East, most markets are moving very, very quickly towards this, although they were maybe a little bit late in some markets. They've been trading online since '96, so they're true early adopters, and they've invested in home shopping firms across Asia, and their goal is to be the largest in Asia by 2018. I mentioned earlier that the Chinese are coming. I guess we welcome that in some ways, and we might want to be a little bit threatened by that in others, because they are not only producing for us and helping us to make more margin and manufacturing most of our goods, but they are sending us customers now, high net worth individuals as tourists, but they're also developing retail propositions. There are a couple of Chinese retailers with stores in London now, and they are looking to take market share away from domestic market retailers. Don't know if any of you have heard of these guys, called Light in the Box. They're an e-tailer. In 2012, I don't have 2013, 2012, $200 million worth of sales to 17 countries, half to Europeans. And in 2013, they raised $80 million in a US stock offering, gaining credentials and consumers' trust. So it's becoming increasingly easier for them to move into other markets, especially as our consumers are now becoming used to to buying online, internationally as well. That makes their propensity to buy online from a Chinese retailer increasing all the time. So every consultant has to come up with at least one model in their lifetime. I'm sure I've come up with more than one, but one that I came up with is the 11 C's of internationalization. I dare say many of you smarter than me out there will think of a number of additional C's. Keep some of those to yourself for now, but you can maybe share them with me afterwards. So let's start with country, and this is a nice little matrix for you to go through just to have a think about, some of the challenges in a country by country basis. So competitor analysis. Who's already in that market? What's the size of the opportunity? What local market brands are there? What foreign companies are there already in there with market share? Is there anybody else already trailed a blaze or blazed a trail that can, show us the way into that market? Pricing. Looking at similar products in the market for customer price point expectations. If you're not going to make margin and you're going to be driven down on price, one would argue why would you be going in there? Distribution and logistics, hugely complicated, hugely important in terms of the customer value proposition. I don't think too many people are going to go local market fulfillment straight away. ASOS were already doing 3 jumbo jets of sales a week before they opened their local market fulfillment. So they were already up to about £1 million a week. They're now closer to £1.5 million before they even started holding any stock locally. So I think you're definitely going to want to test demand before you start thinking about having local fulfillment, but you do need to be thinking about import duties, how you're going to return goods, how customers are going to return the goods, and so on. Language expectations we've already talked about. What's the cost of a fully translated site versus a country trading in English? If I were you, depending on what market you're in, I would certainly go English language first of all, and I would go UK if you're not already there. I would go Ireland if you're not already there. I would go Australia if you're not already there, because there's a lot of demand in Australia for lots of different reasons. I would even think about Scandinavia, and I would probably think about Holland, because all those countries you can get away with an English language site. I think if you're going to go into Italy, you're going to go into Spain, if you want to go into Germany, France, or other markets, or Russia, you really need to have a local language proposition. And I'm not dismissing what Martijn said earlier. I think you can dip your toes. I think you can try to build the business case, but really, if you want to understand what the opportunity is, you're kind of going to have to go the whole hog to really get a feel for that. Is there any existing awareness in that market? How many visitors do you currently get to the site? Existing wholesale partners, is there anything that you can do with them? Marketing costs, thinking about PR and not just your pay-per-click and everything else. And then again, case studies. Are there any case studies of brands like me, brands like you, that you can tap into to help you maybe avoid making some of the mistakes and help you leapfrog as you enter new markets? And ultimately, the size of opportunity and need, you do need to review the suitability of a product into a local market. So just to talk about product very briefly, I've got a great case study. So most of you probably know that J. Crew, fantastic American multi-channel retail business, Mickey and his brand, brilliant business, launched in the UK in 2013. Their cheapest featherweight, i.e. low quality cashmere jumper is £188. That's not very cheap, thank you very much. Local competition, including from Zara, Uniqlo and M&S, well, they're selling a thicker pile jumper for £60 to £100. Similar quality. So the question, of course, will be, will they be successful or not? Have they really given enough thought to their product, to their range, and making sure that it's going to be competitive, not only in terms of pricing, but in terms of quality and getting that dead right for the needs of the local market? Consumers, customers, we all need them. So market analysis, to be clear about what customer segmentation looks like and how relevant and closely aligned your product or your service or your brand proposition is going to be with the local market. Even things like broadband, mobile penetration, if you're going into a new market, are you going mobile first? Do you actually need a desktop site? What should your focus be from that point of view? Is broadband penetration at a level that's driving customer demand? Broadband used to be really expensive in Australia, and it's only been the last few years, from about 2011, that it's become much more cost effective. Same as in the UK, around about 2003 to 2004, it became cheaper to get broadband. There were more service providers. More people started using the internet. The experience was better. People started to buy products. So the same model pretty much works in every market. So if you're looking at a market that has low level of broadband penetration, I would probably run away from it fairly quickly. Credit cards, PayPal usage in that market, fulfillment and delivery expectations, these all form part of your value proposition. What's the demographic, the lifestyle factors, and the behavior of customers in those markets? And if you've already got traffic and already got some customers coming to your sites already, then you can take some learnings from that. Communication, marketing, customer service and content. Is local language content necessary? If so, customers will likely expect local language customer service too. There is nothing worse than buying online from a site or a business in one country when you live in another and not being served locally. Another line for you from Tony Shea, the founder of Zappos. Some of you will know this in his book. He talks about the fact that Zappos are a customer service business that happen to sell shoes. So if you could take one thing away from my presentation today, I'd hate to think it's the only thing you take away, but if you take one thing away, I would urge you to go back to your business and think about, if we were a customer service business that happened to sell whatever we sell, electronics, food, apparel, footwear, homewares, whatever it is, how would we engage and talk to our customers differently from how we do it today? And I bet you anything you want, you would do a lot of things very, very differently. No disrespect to anybody from Paul Smith if they're here, but if you want to have a laugh, go and look at the terms and conditions on their website. I won't tell you anymore, but just read it, read what it says about the usage of their website, and you'll know where I'm coming from. Do you want internal local language resource, or will you use third party only? The cost for different countries will obviously affect your return on investment from that market. Even with in-house resource, you're likely going to need some country support, maybe around PR, we talked about that already, to make sure that the plan is fully optimized. So here's a little matrix again. I know, it's hard to see probably when you're up the back, but you'll have this, content with you tomorrow. So when you look through that paid search, are you going to use a local agency, or are you going to do it centralized? You're going to do it from your head office as it is? Do you really have the skills to know what customers are really looking for in those local markets, to even understand the nuances in language, to make sure that you maximize the opportunity, or are you actually going to look to use somebody that knows that local market inside out? Frequency in terms of emailing, I think different markets have a higher propensity to receiving more emails than others. I think in the UK, we're all spammed out. And if you're going to send us an email, you need to make sure it's personalized and it's really relevant. SEO, the impact of internationalization on organic listings and quality scores. You've got to think about other search engines when you go into China. You've got to think about Baidu. And it's not all about Google, it's mainly about Google. So Google has just about all the world, but certainly in China and Japan and some other markets, you're going to have to look at some local service providers there as well. Social, the importance of network by market, localized social websites. VK in Russia has over 230 million registered users. And when I talk about China briefly later, I'm going to talk about the importance of tying up with bloggers and important individuals in those markets. Culture and climate. In Sweden, functionality, simplicity and speed are the most important features of an online shop. That's what the Swedes like. No clutter. So you look at a lot of Swedish brands, it's quite minimalist. I was going to say it's a bit like an IKEA store, but I'm not sure that's true. In France, the focus is on design. Model shots and lifestyle images in the West might not go down that well in the Middle East. I'm sure you probably are all aware of that. I have seen some brands make a few faux pas there. There are basic operational things to think about. Public holidays, working hours. Mother's Day in the UK is not Mother's Day in the US. It's probably not Mother's Day in the rest of Europe. So I think Valentine's Day largely probably is, but there are lots of other events that fall at different times of the year. There's nothing worse than having, a big opportunity in another market, and because you thought it wasn't a public holiday or it was a public holiday, you didn't get the proposition right. There are bigger strategic questions about whether you need to localize the product range too, and I've kind of touched on that. I don't think you would go too deeply into that initially until you really understood your customers far better and what level of demand you were going to have in local markets. Customer service, how are you going to handle customer orders and queries from multiple time zones? If you're going to sell into Australia, you need to recognize there are 11 hours ahead of you at this time of year, or 10 hours if you're mainland Europe, and 8 hours and 9 hours respectively in our summer. So how are you going to manage that? How many languages can your own customer service team support? When I talk about languages, I am not talking about somebody that speaks Pidgin German like me, or Pidgin French, or Pidgin Spanish. I'm talking about local nationals who actually really are fluent in that local language. Shipping and the last mile of delivery, what's that experience going to be like? We've touched on competitors already. Thinking through your marketing mix, market share and positioning in order to understand how to gain a competitive advantage against local competitors and other international online competitors. So this is a nice little framework for you to go through and just think about all these things when you're planning each of the markets that you're thinking of entering. Currency and payment. Germans, as I mentioned, pay by ELV or direct debit. Scandinavians like to pay cash on delivery. Chinese like to favour cash on delivery, but that's also changing fast. So what are the new emerging payment methods that you're going to have to really implement in order to be relevant for the needs of customers in those local markets? And can your existing payment service provider cater for all those methods? Because it might well be that they can't. It might well be you need to change your payment service provider, which is not a simple thing and a quick thing to do, in order to be more relevant for other markets. Conversion. What KPIs should you expect in different countries? We touched on this earlier. Returns rates in one market is going to be very different in another one. So there isn't one sort of broad-brushed approach to every market. You need to start to really understand how your KPIs are going to vary market by market. Channels and category. If you have stores in that country, are you going to offer a cross-channel proposition? Are you going to do click and collect? Click and collect's becoming increasingly important. And if you're going to internationalize into somebody's market, you're up against local market retailers who are also going to be implementing that. So what are you going to do to combat that if you already have stores there? How will direct selling online impact your relationship with local wholesale customers? We spoke about that right at the beginning. And franchise partners. How are you going to get them on board? Can you give them a commission? Do you just want to enable them and empower them to do it? Do you want to give them the tools and let them get on with it? So you've got a few things to think about there. What kind of mobile proposition should you provide? I touched on that. In the Netherlands, smartphone penetration is high, but mobile transactions are low. In India, unreliable fixed landline and telecoms means that consumers are mobile first. So the strategy for India is absolutely a mobile first approach. It's not a desktop approach. In the UK at the moment, nearly a quarter of online sales are on mobile devices, up from about 12% a year ago, and over a third of site visits are from mobile devices, up from a fifth a year ago. This year is the tipping point in mobile in the UK. By the end of this year, pretty much every mature multi-channel retailer in the UK will have more than half of their traffic coming from a mobile device, smartphone or a tablet. By the end of next year, more than half of their sales will come from a mobile device. So that's, again, how quickly things are changing from a technology and an experience perspective. So what does mobile look like in new markets? The most advanced retailers are optimizing content and experience for different types of devices. I'm sure you're already all looking at responsive design and making sure that your content is being pushed and morphs into an appropriate experience depending on the browser and the size of the browser the customer is engaging with. Content, it's not just language that needs changing. You also need a content strategy appropriate to each market, and you need to think about your content management solution. Is that fit for purpose? Does that allow you appropriate levels of access and control over the content that's going to be populated in local markets? And I couldn't think of a better C to talk about organizational structure, so I came up with CREW, which is really quite poor. It's a bit of an Americanism. But how are you going to resource the team? Can you do it all from your central office? I know a lot of brands that try to do that in the minute, and really, in my opinion, that's a pretty hard thing to do unless you have foreign nationals in your local sort of domestic market business who are Germans, who are French, who are Italians, who are Spanish, who are Dutch, and not only speak the language, but also have marketing skills and customer service skills. So you're going to have to think about how to manage all of that. Local language and service. Are you going to outsource that, or are you going to try to insource that in the business? Talked about localized marketing. This is Clark's team structure. This is Dave Elston, who's the European head of e-commerce. He's probably moved on a bit since he gave me this slide, but if we look at his team, he's got a virtual trading team, he's got webmasters, he's got an EU digital marketing team. But if you look at the bottom left, he's got a trading team that includes a visual merchandiser for each site. He's got a marketing team, including content editor for each site. France and Germany are based in the UK with a core team, which does seem a little bit odd. And Holland and Spain, the teams are based in that country. I might have done that the other way around. But ultimately it comes down to a balance between global consistency and localization, and they can't do everything at the one time as much as they would like to. I'm just going to finish off briefly. ASOS, local teams equal more engagement. So they now have a local marketing team. They have local fulfillment. They've been able to take their sales online just in Australia from £1 million a week to £1.5 million a week in a relatively short period of time. Last, you'll be glad to hear, but definitely not least, China. You might have thought I'd forgotten about it. Definitely not. So why would you be looking at China right now? A current population of approximately 1.3 billion. 300 million are regarded as middle class, disposable income. Go and have a look at how many Bentleys and Rolls Royces and Ferraris are now driving around the streets of Beijing, etc. That's almost equal to the whole population of the United States, 5 times the population of the UK, all with disposable income. So that tells me there's a fairly good potential demand over there. There are already 500 million Chinese online. By 2025, GDP in China will have increased 5 times, 5-fold from what it is today. Think of what that means in terms of overall spend, overall retail sales. It's phenomenal. Retail sales are a staggering 1.3 trillion per annum and are growing at 15% annually, and luxury sales by 35%, driven by that segment with high disposable income. So the younger consumer, whose average age is 34, they have much higher discretionary spend. They want to show off their success. It's a new capitalist economy, and they want to show every one of you and every one of their local inhabitants in their market how well they're doing. So what a great opportunity as a premium brand to be selling to those customers. There are 22 new urban centres the size of New York being developed. I can't get my head around that. 22 new urban centres the size of New York. Phenomenal. So I think I'd be going for a multi-channel strategy there. I'd start with the web, and then I'd really have a think about a store business in those urban centres. By the end of 2014, online sales will be greater than the US. So this year, China, by the end of this year, China will become the #1 B2C online market globally. Mobile, mobile internet access already surpassed PC in 2012. So again, going into China, I think it's going to be a mobile-first approach. I know I've bombarded you with quite a lot in quite a short space of time. I am kicking around the rest of the afternoon. I think we might have time for a question or two. I'm not sure. I'd be delighted to answer any, or please come and see me afterwards. I hope you enjoyed that. Actually, I had one more slide. See, I'm ahead of myself now. Joyce. Joyce is a blogger in China. She has more than 11 million people following her and listening to her every word. So if you are going into China, make sure you find the Joyces and the other key opinion leaders, the KOLs, in your sector, because these are the people that will make the difference between you having no engagement and a very cost-effective marketing strategy. Thank you very much.